During a speech at the Reagan Library, former House Speaker Paul Ryan weighed in on today's culture war, because why not?
Culture matters, absolutely, yes. But our party must be defined by more than a tussle over the latest grievance or perceived slight. We must not let them take priority over solutions grounded in principle to improve people's lives. Because politics based on racial or other identity is always a path to deeper and deeper hostility.
Some have called Ryan's comments anti-conservative. Journalist Zaid Jilani joins us now via Skype with his reaction. Welcome, Zaid.
Hey guys, good to be here.
Okay, so I'll just come out right now and say I'm going to call Paul Ryan's comments anti-conservative. I think that what he's doing is conflating, sort of these useless culture war fights, which there are many of, with also useless policy battles, and that's, I think, an unfair comparison. What was your takeaway, Zaid? How do you think Paul Ryan is? Do you think Paul Ryan is reflective of the political establishment right now, even though he's weighing in, having been out of politics for a couple of years?
Well, let's remember something. When Paul Ryan left office, he didn't entirely leave politics. So he set up a foundation. It's called American Idea Foundation, basically to promote free market type ideas. I looked at its nonprofit filings the other day, and I saw they have something like between $8 or $9 million in revenue. So they're controlling a significant amount of money for a small organization. And I think at least part of this money came from his leadership PAC, or the money that he had collected when he was still in office. So Ryan, I think, sees himself as an active participant in politics, and we don't really know who funds the foundation, given that amount of money. So I imagine that he also has allies in the corporate world and in the donor class in the Republican Party. And I think, if I was Paul Ryan, I would be a little bit concerned by some of the trends in the Republican Party right now. So Ryan was in his early days, and I made a video about this back when I worked at Think Progress. He was a devotee of Ayn Rand, who was a objectivist philosopher. She's a very, very important kind of influential thinker for mid-20th century libertarians. And honestly, if you're like 17, 18 years old, you probably know people who are really into her books, because she tends to appeal particularly to young people, young men. And Ryan actually has said on a testimonial video that he was very much inspired by her ideas and getting into politics. So I think he's a deep believer in this, but he also has sort of a political alliance of people who are believers in this market ideology. And like I said, if I was them, I'd be concerned right now, because let's think back to 2009, an equivalent time when a new Democratic president took office. There was the Tea Party, there was tax enough already, opposition to bailouts, opposition to stimulus, to healthcare spending, healthcare laws. There's really none of that right now, right? The right is not mobilizing in large numbers against the welfare state, against social spending. It's not really the issues that animate them. It doesn't mean that they're not concerned about it, but it's not really the hot button issue, right? And I think that would threaten someone like Ryan, because Ryan would prefer that we were talking about, Medicare being unsustainable, Social Security needing some form of private accounts or privatization, about Medicaid block granting, about things like this that really don't really fire up the conservative base at this point, and they're generally fairly unpopular if you poll people about them. So I think, in many ways, the reason why he doesn't want there to be culture war is not necessarily just because the culture war can be very annoying at times to people on both sides, but because it crowds out the issues that really concern him. And I think that's part of why he gave this speech, and he has this substantial foundation where he can kind of pump out the free market propaganda.
I do think, it's a question of priorities, and I think Paul Ryan saying the priorities should be on some of these economic issues that in his mind really impact people is, it's a question, I think that's out of touch, right? I think these culture war battles actually do really impact people right now. I think that's what he's not understanding.
I think what he also misunderstands, and Zaid, curious for your take on this, is that if Republicans weren't talking about this culture war stuff, he believes that then they'd go back to talking about his demand to privatize Medicare, right, to privatize Social Security, cut spending. But that's not at all the case.
Right.
The party has moved on this stuff and is, Trump won by saying he's going to protect Medicare, protect Social Security. During the debate over repealing Obamacare, he's like, why don't we just do single payer? And everybody around him is like, no. We're definitely not doing single payer. But he got where that's going. And so Republicans need something to talk about. They're not going to call for privatizing Social Security, whether or not they talk about that or not. So, so Dr. Seuss is sitting there, and Zaid, you made an interesting point on Twitter the other day. Maybe we can, if we have that, we could put that up. That's saying like, look, if the cost of consensus on supporting Medicare and Social Security is that we have to talk about Dr. Seuss, then okay, fine, let's talk about Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that among everyone else out there, 95% of people in the country probably who aren't like obsessive social media users are very annoyed at some of the silly things that happen to be talked about in politics. I think they're very annoyed that we're having, culture wars over even wearing a mask, in a place. We have hyperbolic comparisons to that from Marjorie Taylor Greene and so on and so forth. But yeah, the alternative may very well be what we saw in the politics between 2009 and I would say 2014 or 15 in the Republican Party, which was obsessively, opposing any kind of expansion of government spending on things like healthcare or education. And I think just a real obsessive devotion on Paul Ryan's part to doing a bunch of things that really don't even poll well, even if you exclusively poll Republicans about what they'd like to do to the social insurance programs, to Social Security, to Medicare, to Medicaid, or what you want to do on tax policy. And I think what Donald Trump proved, I mean, honestly, if you look back at the Trump administration, probably 85 or 90% of the things they did on economic policy, Paul Ryan would agree with. I mean, fundamentally on policy, they weren't that different. But I think what Trump proved is that rhetorically, you don't have to be for Paul Ryanism at all, right? You can say the exact opposite of it and win a Republican presidential primary. And I think he did govern in some ways that departed from orthodoxy on issues like trade. And he kind of opened the door a little bit. And I think that's part of why Ryan is kind of more vocal. He didn't call out Trump by name, I think, in his speech, but he did kind of allude to it because he sees Trumpism. It doesn't really have much ideological content, but because it doesn't have ideological content, that's kind of a threat to Paul Ryanism, which does have ideological content. It's a very right-wing libertarian philosophy. And he sees the continued presence of someone like Trump scrambling, I think, the party's ideological convictions and leaving room, for somebody who could maybe be a little bit more ideologically motivated to kill Paul Ryanism, which I think there are a few people in the Republican Party now who do want to do that. They're still a minority faction, but the difference between now and 10 years ago is that they actually exist, right? And they have a foothold and a platform. So it's certainly a threat. And if I was in issues, I'd probably be doing a lot of the same things, given the threat to my ideology. So.
And by the way, it's only somewhat related, but my mom actually discovered some of this contraband in her house the other day, and she mailed me a copy of On Beyond Zebra. That she had signed in like 1979 or something. And it was one of the ones, pretty sure, that was canceled. And I flipped through it, trying to figure out what was in it that got it canceled. And I think I found one page that maybe could have been it.
I think you could sell it in the black market, not on eBay, because apparently it's too dangerous to sell on eBay. But now
it's in really poor condition. But hey,
that's even better. That makes it like hipster, like it's like antique now.
Yeah.
So this is like to Bill Maher's point that he made the week that the Dr. Seuss thing blew up. He's like, who's not worried about outdated Chinese stereotypes in Dr. Seuss books? The Chinese. They're building up their military. They don't have time or an interest to sort of like wax sanctimonious about outdated stereotypes that we all know that we've kind of moved on from. Zaid, thank you so much for your time on Rising this morning.
Thank you.
Next on Rising, senior reporter at The Real News, Giselle Noor, joins us to discuss worker co-ops' unique business model. That's when Rising returns.